Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, with the federal government still shut down and two political parties still blaming each other, a White House whisperer shares that a decision on rescheduling could come before the end of this year because it's, quote, good politics. And while lobbyists appeal for support from the industry and consumers, we talk exclusively with the Executive Director of MPP, the Marijuana Policy Project. His name is Adam Smith.
But our primary concern for me is not only to end prohibition, but to end prohibition well. And ending prohibition well means that we have a legal regime that is grounded in public health, in public safety, and public access.
And an Ohio judge puts the kibosh on that state Governor Mike DeWine's executive order to ban the sale of THC-infused hemp products. And in Oregon, the man responsible for shooting two people during a robbery of a cannabis dispensary has been found not guilty. And Nebraska regulators miss an October 1st deadline for awarding of licenses, but still manage to issue two for cultivators. Advocates are growing frustrated in the Cornhusker state, where over 70% of voters voted and approved the medical marijuana program last fall. We'll hear from Krista Eggers from Nebraskans for Medical Marijuana.
They violate the statute. They are in complete violation of the law. Voters, patients, the state, 71% of people spoke very, very clearly that they want medical cannabis.
Target will be carrying THC-infused beverages in legal adult use states, the first major national chain and big box store to do so. All that and our international reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM-TV's weekly reports on the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. Even though all is quiet on the federal front since the government is still closed for business, the latest from Washington, D.C., as reported by Marijuana Moment, is an unnamed White House insider calls cannabis reform, quote, good politics. Unquote. That same staffer shared that President Trump sees how cannabis reform could benefit Republicans ahead of the 2026 midterms. In the meantime, lobby groups are out trying to drum up support from consumers and business. After all, at some point, the government will have to reopen. Both sides of the political aisle continue to point the blame finger at each other for the impasse. In reality, many federal employees have been laid off, and there's been a walkout of journalists at the Pentagon based on an information block controlled by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. Our executive producer, Jimmy Young, was able to land an exclusive interview with the executive director of the Marijuana Policy Project, Adam Smith. Here's Jimmy.
Thanks, Alaina. So happy to have the Executive Director of the Marijuana Policy Project, Adam Smith, here as our exclusive lead interview on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Adam, I was so compelled to reach out to you after I read your newsletter earlier last week. And I want to know, is that an industry call for help more than anything else right now?
Well, it's really a call for the industry and advocacy to be a lot more strategic and to look at the big picture and to figure out where our strengths are. We're sort of running all over the place. And while everybody waits for the federal government to come in and magically solve this problem, which is not happening, the states are where everything has always happened in cannabis. And even if the feds decide to deschedule tomorrow, the states would still decide whether and where cannabis could be sold and how it could be sold in their states. Most of what industry needs, it would be great to get descheduling and tax relief and potentially interstate commerce, but most of the rules that affect industry are still going to be at the state level. And so it was a call to industry to understand that advocacy has not only played a big role in getting us where we are, right? We have an industry that was born from a movement, right? And I point out in the piece, which is an open letter to the industry, that a lot of industries put a lot of money into advocacy on issues that the industry themselves cannot be credible on, right? And they call that astroturfing. They set up organizations and they fund them and they make it look like they have grassroots support. We come from a much more pure place. We have an industry that was born out of advocacy, and that advocacy was born out of real suffering and real loss, right? And that is a much healthier, right? You have advocacy, which breeds freedom, which breeds opportunity, which breeds industry, right? And here we are. But as that happened, the philanthropists that funded the launch of all this have faded away. Some have died. And they looked and they said, okay, the industry's here and now they can take care of it. And then industry began to struggle. And what you've seen is that you've seen the advocacy space shrink and shrink and shrink and get to the point where it is almost to the point of being shrunk to not being effective. And so what the letter was a call to industry to understand that while they can talk about dollars and cents, it gets very hard for industry to talk about things like public health and safety credibly because they have this profit incentive. And what advocacy does is we talk about the entire plant. We talk about it from a good policy standpoint without that profit incentive. And so it's the combination of advocacy and industry that can move this forward. And we've sort of lost that. So this was a call for a reconnection of the broader movement between advocacy and industry, and to really think about where we need to put resources and how we can strategically attack this problem across states. That may be a longer answer than you were looking for, Jimmy, but here we are.
That's all right. No, but it was very articulate. You're awesome, Adam. I appreciate the time, and you obviously know what you're talking about. You've been in the trenches. The most obvious next question is, how much has the government shutdown hurt this movement?
I can't speak for what it's done for industry, right? And I'm sure I'm about to go to Washington, D.C., and I'm sure a lot of people out of work there, and I'm sure it's not helping, anybody's industry, although cannabis tends to be somewhat resilient in the face of recession because people reach for it, in times of crisis. So I'm not sure that it has hurt the movement, but it certainly is something to talk about the federal government, other than the tiresome will they reschedule to Schedule 3, which I'm about done with listening to.
Well, yes, and yet that still would at least give legitimacy to the fact that this is a plant medicine,
100%,
and it will help 280E. It's better than nothing. It's about a little bit, not much more than that, right?
I don't mean to downplay it, but it is.
I understand.
But it is a half measure. It is something that the industry has spent a lot of time thinking about.
We'll have the rest of that interview on Thursday, when we usually publish our one-on-one special reports for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In California this week, Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill that would have allowed medical patients the opportunity to get cannabis delivered to them at home. Medical-only cannabis dispensaries are not exactly thriving in any state that has existing adult use legalization. That side of the industry has seen its market size decline. That puts many medical-only dispensaries in financial jeopardy and are barely surviving. The governor's reasoning for this veto was the cost of expanding its track and trace system that would have been just under $270,000, a mere pittance for the largest cannabis market in the U.S. You might remember that last week, the big story was in Ohio, where their governor, Mike DeWine, used his executive powers to enact an emergency ban on the sale of THC-infused products from hemp. This week, a judge blocked that move, and right now, Ohio is right back where it was before governor intervened. That's not the only news about hemp. The big story is that Target will start carrying THC-infused hemp beverages in their store, the first big box store to carry these products where they are legal. Kerry Hinkle has more in this week's Hemp Report.
I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I'm back again with another Hemp Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, we turn our attention to Minnesota, where Target has launched a pilot program of hemp-derived THC beverages. Now, they're launching in 11 stores. They're carrying 5 milligrams and less on potency, and they have started with 12 brands. Now, some of those brands are local to Minnesota, like Trail Magic and Shirley Brewing. There's also some national ones, like Can and Senorita, which, of course, is owned by the MSO Green Thumb Industries. Now, We've seen in the last few years as this category of hemp-derived THC beverages has exploded with major alcohol retailers like Total Wine & More and ABC Liquor in Florida, Benny's in Chicago, among a handful of others that have started to carry these beverages. But Target's the first real behemoth S&P 500 large publicly traded retailer to dip their toes in the water of carrying these products. And what's particularly interesting is where they're started. Now, of course, Target is headquartered in Minnesota, but Minnesota also has one of the most robust regulatory schemes for all things hemp. They have hemp-derived THC beverages on draft in stadiums. They have licensing and regulations in place that have allowed for this industry to flourish in the state, so much so that a retailer like Target can feel comfortable enough to say, yes, these products are legal. Yes, there's clear consumer demand. And yes, we want to offer them, especially as we see alcohol and other SKUs in that retailer, but among others, have started to decline. And so hemp-derived THC beverages are clearly here to stay, and we'll see if Target starts to get involved to defend the right to sell these products. But for now, it's a huge win for the industry, and we will see what big retailer is up next to start carrying the products. Again, for Bayou City Hemp and for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Kerry Hinkle. We'll see you again next week.
Now let's hear from our Ohio correspondent, Christina Brisson, and her take on the dog and pony show going on in the legislature in her state, something they are all starting to get used to. Here's Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm working on trying to make my presentations a little more personable, a little more candid, so let's try this and see how it goes. And let's talk about what's going on here in Ohio. So recently, Judge Carl Levine has blocked Governor Mike DeWine's order to ban intoxicating hemp products, which would have lasted for 90 days, at which point the Ohio General Assembly would have had a chance to extend or end said ban. Now, this also involves a rule that would invoke a $500 per day fine for these stores that didn't have it off the shelves in time. Additionally, 3 businesses sued DeWine as soon as this order was issued. So now we're about to see what's going to happen. This block will only last for 14 days. We'll see what's presented. And let's talk about the reality of the situation. Do I think there should be regulation on intoxicating hemp products? Absolutely. Do I think it's going to hurt Ohio businesses with what's going on right now? Also, absolutely. We need to come to some sort of medium agreement. We can't have everyone that can pay $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 for a license for a dispensary, but not be able to sell it a product. So let's find a medium that protects our public, makes people safe, and also doesn't hurt Ohio businesses. I am Christina Brisson with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Over the Top Renovations with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In New York, the Office of Cannabis Management offered 2 opinions on what to do with the battle between local municipalities and states in regards to the opening of cannabis businesses. Case in point is the town of Southampton that has had quite a few dust-ups with licensed stores who have opened without town approval. The New York State Licensing Board believes the state should dictate where dispensaries are allowed to operate. The dispute over jurisdiction in Southampton will surely end up in court focused on the opening and then closure of the Charlie Fox dispensary. But in Michigan, that's not a problem they have anymore. But there is another major issue that is now heading to court. 2 weeks ago, their governor, Gretchen Whitmer, signed a 24% increase on wholesale sales tax of cannabis in order to fix the roads and bridges in that state. Now, advocates are taking the state to court to block the implementation of that hefty tax hike. Here's Amy Carter with the Michigan Report that is now being supported and sponsored by Wally's Wonder World of handmade, customizable humidors.
This is mold on wheat. This is mold on weed. And this is what this Wonderworld plant is supposed to look like. Do you want to make sure this never happens to your precious flower? Check out the handmade humidors by Fenton, Michigan craftsman Gregory Johnson. Each humidor can hold 1 ounce of your stash, and it comes with a Boveda humidity pack. You care about your flower, so protect it inside a humidor made with American-grown maple, cherry, or sapele wood. Check out their website at wallyswonderworld.com. There you'll find the famous award-winning Hakuna Matata No Worries Humidor. You'll also find a variety of humidors with different designs. They even customize accessories like doobie tubes, grinders, and even a classic roach clip from the 70s. Treat your stash with class with a custom-made, handmade humidor from wallyswonderworld.com and never worry about moldy weed again.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Sure seems like things in Michigan are going up in smoke. We thought things were bad last week, but they're even worse now. A set of bills have been dropped by the Senate, and there are groups both supporting it and in opposition. Michigan Senate Democrats have introduced a major package of legislation aimed at stabilizing the state's multi-million-dollar cannabis industry, which now faces a newly approved 24% wholesale tax. The bills referred to the committee this week target two main areas. Senate Bills 597 and 598 propose a new statewide cap on retail licenses, limiting them based on population, roughly 1 per 10,000 residents. This is a dramatic change from the current voter-approved law that allows for unlimited licenses set only by local communities. The Michigan Cannabis Industry Association strongly supports this. Director Robin Schneider said, "Unlimited cultivation licenses have created oversupply, causing wholesale prices to plummet, financially harming businesses and all the way down the supply chain." However, critics like Jamie Lowell, a legalization advocate and a Michigan Weedster board member, opposing the bills, calling it a major unnecessary rewrite of a voter-approved law. Secondly, unregulated hemp products, Bills 599 through 602, would extend the regulatory framework to consumable hemp and ban the importation of untested, intoxicating hemp-derived products. Proponents say this protects public safety and stops untaxed products from undercutting the legal market. In April 2025 decision People v. Armstrong, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled that the smell of cannabis alone is no longer sufficient probable cause for police to search a vehicle due to the drug's legalization for adults. However, the court is continuing to review critical cases such as People v. Freddie Wilkins to clarify the limits of the new rule, particularly when a traffic stop involves occupants under the age of 21 years of age. In the Wilkins case, the core legal question is whether the odor still justifies a search when the occupants are too young for legal possession, an issue where the defense argues the common smell of marijuana doesn't prove who, when, or if a law was illegally broken, while the prosecution contends that the under 21 status makes any possession illegal and justifies the search. The court's final decision in the Wilkins will further reshape the Fourth Amendment rights regarding cannabis in the state. Remember, the fight's not over. It's not legal until every person is free from fear of prosecution, until every caregiver and doctor is protected, until every last prisoner is released and reunified with their family. We have to stay united. That's it for this week. Hopefully, better news next week. I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Michigan Report is sponsored by Wally'sWonderworld.com.
The Journal of the American Medical Association published an editorial this past week calling for medical doctors to be more informed about the medicinal benefits of cannabis. The editorial pointed out the facts that even though cannabis is still wrongfully placed in Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, JAMA stated, quote, "It is no longer sensible for clinicians to remain willfully ignorant. Medical cannabis is here. Will physicians catch up, or will we, through omission, continue to let patients navigate therapeutic uncertainty alone?" Unquote. The editorial goes on to state that doctors should get instruction on the endocannabinoid system. They should also have a basic understanding of pharmacokinetics of THC, CBD, and other minor cannabinoids. Plus, they suggest risk profiles, dosing and titration methods. The publication also urged doctors should understand the legal regulations and strategies for patient-centered communications and shared decision-making. The Journal of the American Medical Association is published in Boston, Massachusetts, the state that Curtis Emery reports from every week. Here's Curtis.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A breaking story here out of Massachusetts. The CCC has uncovered that the regulatory body itself has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees with very little description, some listed as general services, and one egregious amount, $200,000, being spent on, well, there's no description on what that money was spent on, just that it was spent on legal fees. Now, the lack of transparency itself is enough to raise alarm, but the amount of money that was spent on these non-traceable transactions or insufficiently detailed transactions is quite alarming, and the CCC has a long way to go to prove these expenses and make it right for the public. Also, a continuing story here in Massachusetts, Suffolk County Sheriff Stephen Tompkins has asked that his extortion case, his federal extortion case, be thrown out of court. Now, Tompkins, who was arrested at the end of this summer on extortion charges, he was alleged to have extorted some money that he invested in a Boston-based dispensary and demanded that money be returned to him. Tompkins' lawyer, however, said that part of the agreement was that he was due the money that he put in and whatever he might have earned on top of that, and therefore engaged in no nefarious schemes to get that money back. He was just making good on the agreement that he thought that he had. It should be interesting to see where this case goes next. I have been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the first section, or A block, of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We have plenty more reports coming up, including our international segments. Plus, the jury has reached a decision in Oregon on a double murder of 2 robbers at a Portland dispensary. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.